Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. I'm excited that you and all of your parts have taken time to be with me and all of my parts. If you are a coach, a client, a therapist, if you are in business or education, and you're curious about the IFS model, you are in the right place. Now, let's see what happens on today's podcast. Hey everyone, today's guest is Dr. Seth Kopald. Seth is the perfect guest to help us transition to fall and to the back-to-school season. Seth has extensive experience as an international trained Montessorian for children ages 2.5 to 6 years old. He has taught child development in a community college. He holds a PhD in organizational management with a specialty in leadership. So, as you can hear, he's exactly who I wanted to talk to when I thought of the challenges of parenting through the season. You all know me by now, and you know that I love summer. So fall has its own challenges for me, especially living in New England, as it feels like it's the end of the sun and the beginning of a long, dark, cold winter. Also, it has its challenges with just routines, having to get up earlier, getting shoes on, getting lunch boxes ready, homework after school, all that stuff. Just makes it a little bit harder on all of us, I think. As is starting to be more of a trend, my guests and I have such a good time chatting that I split this one up into 2 episodes. The first one is all about parenting, and of course, IFS has so much to give us in this area, like having more self-energy, unblending for my parts, and helping my son with his own parts. Seth has so many practical tips that are not hard for us to do. Can I ask inside if I can add in some warmth or add in some compassion when I'm feeling frustrated with my son's behavior, or a part of me is feeling frustrated with a part of him? Of course I can. We also talk about seeing through the lens of our parts and how this impacts parenting. This is something else that IFS gives us. If I am seeing and thinking and feeling through the lens of a 13-year-old part of me, then of course she's going to have a very different reaction to my son's 8-year-old behaviors and feelings. I also want to say a note about a choice I made. My son is home with me while I recorded this with Seth, and he's been home with other recordings. I usually edit out all the interruptions and silly faces that he's making behind me and his interactions with the guest. I usually just edit those things out. But I decided to leave a few of those in there. At one point, he was standing on a treadmill behind me, flossing, and Seth and I were cracking up. Obviously, it is not ideal that I spend 2 hours on a call while I'm at home with my son. And I wondered if there would be some parts of you, as a listener, who might have some criticism about that. I guess I just needed to speak for the part of me that worries about other people's opinions about my parenting. And I actually can feel that part just settled down a bit, just that I spoke for her. She holds a lot of fears. Happy fall. I'm practicing enjoying this season with all its pumpkin spice everything, instead of feeling sad that I have to take my beach stuff out of the car, which I have yet to do. I think that speaks to a very hopeful part of me that thinks maybe we could get another beach day or 2 in there. I will meet you in part 2, where we focus on IFS in the workplace. Enjoy. Hi.
Hi.
So tell me where you are in the world.
I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay.
I'm at my house in my home office. I have an art studio home office down in my basement. I see clients Mondays and Tuesdays, and then Wednesday and Thursdays I rent the office. So if there's people that want to meet face to face. So on Mondays and Tuesdays, strictly Zoom clients. And then for my home office, I do both Zoom and face to face. And I do couples work. Some people, yesterday I had a new couple from Colorado, so on Zoom, which is pretty cool.
And then how do they find you on Zoom? Like, how do people connect with you?
It's interesting. A lot of it, I think people see me on the Internal Family Systems Facebook page, the community page. So they see me answering questions, and that's part of why I go there. But also a lot of it's now word of mouth. Also, I noticed a lot of the trainers now that have worked with me, because I've done some PA work, have given my name out at trainings if people are looking for their own. So I have a bunch of people who are actually IFS therapists, like new to the model, or
That's
who want
great.
their own person to help guide them. And, more so they work with their own system, but sometimes they'll ask questions about the model.
Yeah, that's great. I think a lot of people are in places where they don't have IFS therapists around and they want to learn more about the model. And so it's the best way to learn about the model is doing therapy with an IFS therapist.
Yes, yes.
So if you look out your window, what do you see? What's happening in Michigan right now?
Well, I'm looking out the basement window.
Seth is actually like looking up, looking up and out.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit cloudy today. Well, one thing I could say about my property is here, it's a small city lot, but I've been trying to plant as many plants and remove grass as much as possible to be more sustainable to animals and bees, and so it's essentially like a mini garden that I've tried to create here, which has been really great for me. So not only do I do this work with people, but I do a lot of physical things like that. I like to do my own construction, build my own, help build my deck and things like that. So I enjoy essentially beautifying my surroundings. And lived on the West Coast for a while. I lived in Oregon, so a lot of people there tend to make their backyards more like rooms as opposed to this expansive grass.
Oh, really? Yeah. Why do they do that?
To me, it just feels like a cool vibe, just like where it's another room to go, like place to sit, place to communicate with each other, place to relax, almost like a mini, like if you're at a resort, like a mini vacation in the backyard. More so in the cities, like I say, like in Portland, where there's small lots, people have cool fences and just little points of interest that I really love.
That. Yeah, I think there is something about what I'm around makes me feel good. So if I'm around, like I love my screen and porch and there's little lights and, I feel like I'm inside, but I'm outside. And I think it creates more self, or sort of let self come out a little bit more. I can feel that when I'm around nature, around pretty things.
Yeah. Well, and we also say in IFS that the external constraint creates, sometimes it's hard for us to get in self. So when there's chaos around us and disorder, I used to be a Montessori, I still am a Montessorian, but I used to teach Montessori preschool. And one of the cornerstones of that model is to create an environment that is orderly and soothing. So helps the children organize their insides to be around calmness. And so I do think it definitely helps to remove the external constraints of chaos and I think nature itself, there's a lot of people out there doing things like grounding. It's kind of funny now that, people, we have to have a name for standing on the earth because we're so separate from it. But, just even barefoot on the earth, you'll notice access to self. Some people are claiming that, you actually ground, something electrical happens when you stand on the earth.
Yeah, I've heard that too, right? There's something electrical in your body and in like the bottoms of your feet. And we don't do bare feet a lot anymore. So to have like your bare feet on the earth, it actually.
Yeah, I believe I heard it's essentially like helping you to release the excess of, I don't know if it's negative ions. I'm not a scientist or electrical engineer, so I wouldn't know exactly how to say it, but I definitely have felt it times when I've been under high stress and I can't seem to unblend. I have actually gone outside and actually found dirt as opposed to grass and just put my feet, and I found rather quickly I could find some relief.
Wow.
Yeah, this kind of pulls me down and helps me, I'm here, as opposed to whatever that part is taking me.
I like that. I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of times at the beginning of a session I'll ask, as many of the trainers do, this is not new, I didn't invent this, but focusing on your breath and noticing your feet on the floor, noticing your body in the chair, because just that feeling of being here helps you have a glimpse of, I'm here, and who's the one noticing that I'm here, and all of that.
Yeah. I like that. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking how often I'm doing 1,000 things and my head is going 1,000 miles an hour, and I don't land well. And so I often have to practice landing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
as you're saying it, I'm feeling myself landing here with you a little bit better.
yeah. And I was actually thinking, I don't know if this would work for the podcast, but I wonder if we could even take a minute to kind of go inside and the listeners, if they're open to it, just to notice their body and notice what they're feeling inside, just so even as they listen to it as a recording, that we're connecting on a maybe on a deeper level.
Yeah, would you like to lead us in that?
Sure. So maybe just close your eyes and take some cleansing breaths. Maybe even notice that you could breathe past your chest into your stomach. Just notice your feet touching the ground and your seat on your chair. And often I also like to notice that my attention often is in my head, and even notice that drop down as almost like an elevator going down into your chest, more into your heart space, or some people say heart chakra. Almost like if your heart could have a lens that we could actually see through our heart, which brings a lot of compassion. I think we've known through the centuries that we say, listen to your heart, and some people believe there's like neurological activity in the heart. Just letting our heart see our parts as opposed to our analytical parts, for instance, up in our brain. You might notice a little tingling, which means there's more self-energy. How's that?
That feels really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just noticing that I actually feel like I'm sinking more into my chair, my feet. I took off my shoes and just let my feet rest on the carpet. And I'm actually now aware of my belly in a non-judgmental way. I'm just aware of my midsection, which I wasn't aware of that before.
Yeah, great, wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you for leading us in that. I love that as a way even of beginning, especially like a therapy session. But imagine if every time we entered a space, we did that a little check of like, I am here. And then we could then be with the people we're supposed to be with, whether it's our family or our kids or our clients or our parents or spouses, anybody really.
Yeah, so I totally agree. And I often do that myself, especially if I'm sensing tension, and I know, okay, I'm having a hard day. I want to show up for my kids. I want to show up for my wife. I want to show up for this meeting. I want to do well. And I know if I'm in self, I have more natural wisdom and clarity. So often I will, take some deep breaths, cleansing breaths, kind of check in what parts are here. Sometimes I'll ask who's here, and I'll notice, oh, I have this one that's like before this session I checked in and I noticed there was a part like, oh, it's a little scary because anyone can hear this, So I just just checked in with that part and was willing to trust me and hang back. And then I just felt a lot more like confidence and power come through my system when that one stepped back a little bit.
So two things that are jumping out at me right now. I want to talk about teaching at a Montessori school. And I want to talk about external constraints, because that's something that comes up in trainings a lot, but I don't know that I've talked about it with people here before. So those are two different paths.
So which part do you want me to talk about first?
Would it feel okay to do external constraints first?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way I would describe that is when there are things happening around us that are stressful, like for instance, you find out something at work has gone awry and there's tension, or something's happening at home and people are stressed, or your kids are upset, or your kids are sick, or you're late to get home to make dinner. All of these things are almost like a feeding ground for our parts to get triggered. And because, parts that might feel like, I want to look like a great parent, I want to look like a great worker, I want to be someone who's helpful, I want to be, in those parts kind of jump out. oftentimes and want to solve the situation that's at hand. And when there's, lots of chaos and lots of pressures and one thing happening after another, you also don't get that moment of just sitting here and checking in with yourself. So it's really great that we do have parts that can help in those moments, that we have managers that will keep us organized and keep us, looking professional when we have to look professional. But oftentimes that means that we're not really in self, that we have parts running the show. So we could do well, but if when the less constraints we have, it's just, I find it's easier to be more in self and to take a moment and check in with our parts. And so creating moments, like you mentioned, even in our car, even I tell clients, go to the bathroom and just take a minute to breathe, or sit in your office for like even 5 minutes. It really makes a huge difference just to get away from some of those external stimulus. And sometimes I see my own IFS practitioner, and one thing that she just taught me was, like, sometimes when we're feeling really stressed, it's almost like we oftentimes have a part that feels essentially small, like there's so many big things around us coming down on us. Mm-hmm. And that if we focus on expansion and kind of almost widening ourselves, like, that's almost like bringing in self, that we're not this tiny thing that's being bombarded. And I've noticed by practicing that even in those moments of external stimuli, that like I'm like really sensitive to LED lights and loud noises. I kind of like to have soft, rounded things around me. And I've noticed since I've kind of thought, let me just expand myself, and that I'm not something small being affected, I've noticed that those external stimuli aren't as intense. And so I think, just noticing that these things happening around us are triggering our parts, and this being aware. And then you have a really major external constraints, like what if someone in your family is ill, and what if somebody, your child is late and you can't get a hold of them, and so some of these things they're just real stressors. And it's just good to know, like, this is something that's happening on the outside that's making it really hard for me to be in self right now. And even that moment of glimpse, like, I just acknowledge that, you get a little bit of separation, which may ease the tension and help you kind of calm those parts down a bit.
Yeah, I mean, right. Even realizing, what's happening around me I'm having a hard time being in self because of what's happening around me. Right there, I'm unblended from the parts that are just reacting or feeling small or feeling scared. Just by observing that is a great way of not being blended with that part, just giving that part a little bit of space. I was also thinking, when you talked about being small, I thought, because I also am someone that I can't deal like the chaos, and I get overstimulated really fast. And I think what happens is a part of me, probably a young part, gets small as a way of like hiding from it, or like covering from the noise and the lights and the too much stimulus.
Yeah, and for the listeners that might be new to IFS, and when those parts get activated, it's as if we are experiencing what that part is experiencing. So it's almost like, people say you look through the glasses of this part, or you're really experiencing life as if you are that small child. In that moment of glimpsing of, I'm noticing that I'm sensing a part that feels small. It's like I'm not just looking through the eyes of that part. I'm also noticing that part. And then in that noticing, we often have a lot of compassion, because we see this young child, or we see a part of us that needs help. And then all of a sudden the compassion builds, and we're there for ourselves. And then when self-energy is so boundless of kind of understanding, compassion, presence, we can not just be there for ourselves, but we also can be there for the people around us at that moment, because we just have this new sense of power. I use power in a way of not dominance, but power of like, I have enough strength for everybody, where I can hold. I'm widening ourselves, as my practitioner says. You're almost like, I can hold all of you right now. My parts, your parts. And in that sense, there's this a calmness that you're sharing with people, and people just really just respond, because we know that when I'm in a part, it's almost like I'm inviting your parts to come forward. Parts beget parts. So if I react to my kids with a part, or coworkers or friends, oftentimes our parts have agendas, and might be there's some defensiveness back in there somewhere, or some kind of impression management that's happening, and then people respond often with parts. But if we're in self, it also gives room for people's parts to relax and be more in self. Like you mentioned Montessori earlier, there were times, and I knew nothing about IFS, but I noticed through my own observations that when I worked with 2.5 to 6-year-olds, I had 27 kids in my class with 2 adults. Nowadays, the ratios that wouldn't work for licensing, but for some reason it did back then. And I think Montessori has some exceptions just because of the model. I would notice that as I got louder, they would get louder. And if I calm myself, they would get calm. So if the classroom was, getting kind of chaotic and kids were getting upset with each other, I would literally go sit on the floor cross-legged and just start breathing. And they would just start gathering. They would just slowly come, and they'd think, oh, we must be gathering. They would come and sit in a circle and just be very calm and collected. And I would think, well, this is like magic, I didn't know what it was. I was in my 20s. But I think what it is that I was just inviting self-energy, which is contagious, and it just gives room. I'm like holding space for the whole classroom in that moment. The children feel it. And of course, the younger the child, the more they're a barometer for our energy. Yeah. So with infants, for instance, as you're holding them, if you're stressed, they're not going to calm down. But if you just focus on calming yourself and getting into self, you'll notice they'll just drop in with you.
That's beautiful. I'm thinking as a parent, my son is 8, and I know as a child, I hated when my mom yelled at me. And I know that I'll do the thing that I know I don't want to do. I say, put your shoes on, put your shoes on, put your shoes on, put your shoes on. Why aren't you putting your shoes on?
Right.
He's right here, so he's laughing.
Oh.
Hi.
Mom's admitting right now.
Yeah. What's it like for me to say that? He's playing Legos.
Yeah, he's like, I'm good.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not paying attention to. And so it's so hard when that's happening, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to yell. Right? I can imagine. I don't know. So help me with that.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's 2 ways of looking at it. One, when we talk about external constraints, like, and this is not always easy, but looking at our external systems, like, how do we get ready for going to school? How early do we start our preparations? If our child is someone who kind of slugs, through it, do we give them enough time? Are the shoes accessible? Are they able to tie their shoes themselves? Are they able to find them? So some of it is external, just giving enough time, and also expectation, like letting them know in 5 minutes, I need you to start getting ready. And, so that it's not like, oh, drop what you're doing right now and move on. Because another thing too is when children are engaged in activity, their whole consciousness is there. And when we ask them to step out, it's almost like you're in the middle of an email to a colleague, and I'm asking you to stop your email and just go. You're like, but I need to finish this email. No, it's not important. We need to go. And so even Montessori said you're almost psychologically and spiritually linked to that task. And unless there's closure, it's really hard to separate. So that might even cause distress as you're moving forward. You keep thinking, I didn't finish that email. I really wanted to finish my thought. I really wanted to finish my Lego. I really wanted to get that last piece on. So giving some warning allows them to get closure prior to transitioning to the next activity. And it also shows like a respect to their system, that I'm seeing you and I see that you have that need. And then in the moment, it's like when we start feeling that building, that's why often in IFS we'll say, let's start with your body. Like, where do you sense that part in your body? And oftentimes with tension, or like the part that jumps up to says do your shoes, you might notice you'll start feeling tension in your body. And you say, okay, it's coming. So even to notice like, because I still, as a parent, I know all this stuff, but it doesn't make me a perfect parent. And people say, oh, you must be, Montessorian and all this stuff. And it really lets me know where I stink. Like it helps me go, oh, that's where I made a mistake. That's where I can go and make a repair. Like some people don't know that what they're doing is causing harm. And luckily I do that. So in that moment, I often, if you could just say, okay, I know when we're doing shoes, this happens. I know I have a part that comes up. So sometimes even with that second preparation, like we're getting ready, like I know I have a stressed out part when we need to leave. So I'm just going to watch for that, and then as we're getting ready and it's building, just to notice. And the same with we talked about before, in that glimpsing of noticing inside, okay, I see it coming. I'm not going to just get blended. And sometimes you can speak for the part. Say we've done everything. We've done the closure. We've done the warning. We've done the time. You have shoes that you can manage and they still don't. And it's natural that we might start feeling those parts come up, is even talk for those parts to say, I noticed that I have a part right now that's starting to feel frustrated that we're getting late because I have an appointment and I need to go. I really need your help to get moving. And that's a very different feeling. And I'm sure the reason why as parents we feel so bad later is because somewhere deep down we know that when we yell, and I yell too, and I'm trying, I'm still figuring finding new ways to do things, is that we're telling the child in that moment is, I'm not accepting you. Mm. Right? Like it's almost like a message, like I'm not to their little exiles. I'm not trying to make you feel sad, but to their little exiles, it's almost like in this moment, you might not love me right now, or you're not like me right now, or you might think I'm bad. I'm trying to remind myself of that stuff too, that when I lose it, sometimes we think because we're parents, it's okay. Because we're parents, we're allowed to. We have the power. That's our job. But I feel like, okay, sometimes we're going to yell. And if it does happen, then I think it's our responsibility to do a repair. Because if those parts did feel like in that moment they weren't accepted or loved or whatever it may be, or feel like they're a bad boy or whatever, is that I could say, in that moment, I had a part that was stressed and that part was talking. That's not my belief. Like when I didn't mean to yell at you, that part in me did. But I just wanted to apologize because, that wasn't me. That was a part of me that was upset. And I think we could find another way to do this. And I find that children, they kind of learn about emotional intelligence and about looking inside just from experiencing us openly talk about how we do it. And then you'll start hearing them using those languages sometimes, or just having an understanding that, mom has a part that gets upset, which is very different than mom's mad at me.
Right. Mom thinks I'm a bad boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that how you begin to talk to kids about parts? Like when you think about kids, and how do you begin to talk about IFS with kids?
I think there's like a twofold method. One, talking about your own parts, like, oh, I notice I have a part right now that's feeling really stressed that dinner's not ready, and I think I need some alone time because that part's getting really overstimulated, wherever it may be. But I think also helping to name children's parts, and I don't really in general like to name other people's parts, but with children, they might not have the cognitive awareness to do that. So I might say, oh, and I might not even say you. I don't ever tell people you have a blank part, like, oh, you have a frustrated part, because I think that's all parts, as Dick Schwartz says, all parts can have a range of emotions. So I might have a part that could be frustrated, sad, happy, angry. So I might say, oh, I notice a part of you is feeling frustrated. Right? I notice a part of you sad. And I think with children, a really good way to help them work with their parts is through what we call externalization. So like you have an object There's a tool in IFS called the Universe, with YOU Universe. David Cantor, I believe. So, for instance, I had a time with my son when we went through I went through a divorce, and he was, I think, in first grade at this time. We got divorced when he was in kindergarten, and he had a permission slip for school, and the permission slip said both parents have to sign it. And so he's with me for a week, and then with his mom for a week. But the permission slip was due the next day, and he's like, "Mom's not going to get to sign it. I'm not going to be able to go on the field trip." And he started ramping anxiety and worry, and he was really getting like spinning with that. And in the past, I noticed it would take him quite a while to come back down, and he might even get to school and still not get to a calm space. So I just went to the IFS National Conference. I bought this universe. I said, all right, I'll just give this a try. And I'm a total newbie at IFS. And there's a universe are these metal rings like Saturn around this yellow ball, and the yellow ball is supposed to be like self. And the rings around the ball are where we could place these smaller balls on magnets, like they're like a cutout, and they slip on, and it could represent our parts that are all around ourself. For him, it was the way he helped create this situation was like, these balls represent how he's feeling. So I said, I notice you're feeling a lot of worry and you're really stressed out. Would you like the ball that kind of represents that? And he picked a ball. I believe it was a black ball. And then I think we played a little bit with before, and he's the one that said, I think the closer you get to the yellow in the middle means the stronger the feeling. Like when I'm really stressed out, it's close. When I'm not so stressed out, it's farther. Which makes sense because you're blended, right? So he picked up the ball and he put it as close as you possibly could. There's like one little vertical bar that goes out to the first ring, and he stuck it right against the yellow ball. I'm like, wow, that's really strong. So you're feeling it really strong. And I was like, would it be okay if I talk to that part directly? And he's like, sure. I says, I want that part to know that I'll be responsible to make sure Mom signs it. Like, I will sign it, and I can promise this part, I'll be the one. You don't have to worry. This part doesn't have to worry. I'll take it on, and I'll be the one to make sure this gets signed.
Wow.
How does that feel? And he took the ball and he moved it back like 2 rings.
Wow.
I'm like, okay, that feels better. And then he just like kind of his whole body just relaxed and kind of gave me a hug. And then I'm like, you ready to go? He's like, yeah, I'm ready to go. And we go in the kitchen. All of a sudden he drops his backpack and he runs back in the room. And I kind of looked around the corner to see what he's doing. And he took the ball off and stuck it in the bowl, which told me like, I am completely good. Like, this is, not only is it back away, like I'm fine. And that just sold me on IFS and on externalization, that kids could do this on a rudimentary level, just to notice like, oh, so some people will use sand trays with little figures, like maybe a unicorn represents this part and a knight represents this part, and a turtle represents this part. And so that's one way to say, like, so you're feeling really frustrated. If we say this, dog represents your frustration, what would the dog say? And so in that moment, you kind of have to check in with that part and then speak for that part.
I'm going to back you up again, thinking of the externalizations, and you said something earlier that I thought was brilliant. About putting the glasses on of the part, like you see through the lens of the part. And so we actually are experiencing what that part would experience when we're in that situation.
Yeah, so it's in IFS words, we'd say we're blended with the part. And when you're blended completely, it's as if the part has become you, and now you're totally experiencing what the part is experiencing, yes.
Yeah. And so for people that are new to IFS, they might be familiar with the word trigger, right? Something happens, like an external constraint. Let's say my mom yells at me, or someone as an adult, if anyone raises their voice at me, or I feel like I'm being yelled at. People might not even be yelling at me, but if that happens, then a part of me, a young part, heard those glasses come on, and I feel like I'm being yelled at, and I feel small and I feel scared. And so people that are new to IFS, they might understand, okay, well, I was triggered and now I'm feeling like I felt when I was 5 and my mom yelled at me.
But
What
that
would,
might not.
go ahead.
Yes.
No, not conscious at all, right?
Yeah.
All I know is I'm just all of a sudden I know I've been triggered and I'm having a bodily reaction,
Yeah.
probably.
Right. And it could be also that it's a protector that comes on board. Like someone might be triggering what that 5-year-old felt at the time. But there's like, for instance, anger might be a protector. It says, when somebody treats me the same way I've been treated before, anger is the one that steps in because it doesn't want me to feel how I felt back then. It doesn't want me to feel unloved. It doesn't want me to feel like I'm not worthy. So anger comes in. So then all of a sudden I'm in anger and I'm wearing the glasses of anger. I'm feeling what anger feels. I'm just anger. I'm just the part.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so then what does IFS have to say? Like, what would we do? What would we tell that person? Okay, so we've kind of mapped that out a little bit. What would be the next thing to do? I'm protectors up. I'm feeling angry. Someone's yelled at me. Now I'm going to match that so that I don't have to feel that I'm a bad little boy. I'm going to be angry.
Well, again, I think when I watched the webcast with Dick Schwartz and Lot Kelly, they did Accessing and Living in Self. I forgot the exact title. I think Lot Kelly is the one that used the word glimpse often, and I like that word because he was talking about when you are blended, if you could just for a second, and he uses his hand almost like I'm looking back at myself, or Dick calls it a U-turn, right? So it's not just, it's YOU dash turn. So to do a U-turn is I'm just going to quickly look at myself and see what's happening. Because
Yeah.
oftentimes, even when we're full blown anger, there's usually a little part back there going, "What the heck are you doing?" Right? And goes, "You're about to hurt somebody. Be careful. Don't go too far." So there's usually in that moment when we do a U-turn or we do a glimpse, in the glimpsing and in the U-turn, who's glimpsing. So
Oh,
there's
yeah.
it's almost like I've also heard that self is like the sun; it's always there, and the clouds are like parts. So sometimes it's just asking for just one or two rays to peek through the clouds. Like, on a cloudy day, you might be feeling a little down, and some people are affected by the cloudy day. But when one sunlight beam just pokes through and hits you, you're like, that feels better. So in the same sense, doing a U-turn or doing a glimpse, it's like I'm in just a drop of self-awareness. Okay, I see what's happening. And if you have enough of awareness just to say, yeah, I'm feeling this. The anger has really taken me over. Or even if you're not that aware, just to be able to say to the other person, like, I am so blended with this angry part right now. Just to get some distance. So it's like maybe even if it's the glasses is an analogy, I'm tipping the glasses down my nose so I could look over and I could look through at the same time.
Yeah.
It's not like those lenses that wrap around your head. Like fully blended, I guess, would be like those when you get out of the eye doctor and you only can, no matter where you look, you're not going to be out of it. Whereas when they're self-involved, it's almost like reading glasses where you can look out and you look through. So it's just getting that more awareness. And sometimes we just can't. And there's sometimes we just, to the listeners who say, "Oh God, that sounds great, I just can't do it." That's very common that when we're blended, sometimes it takes time. There's time, I have all this experience and a lot of people have more experience than me, and they still get triggered by mostly their family members, right? Like our spouses, our partners, our children. We love them so much. They seem to have access to our, what you were calling triggers, and to our, somehow it just gets us deeper. So I might be able to be in self all day with clients, and I just feel like it's almost like I got paid before I got paid because I got my own session being in self. And then I come home and I could be a total jerk. But the more I think to myself, okay, I'm just going to get to know the part. So sometimes it's like with children, while they're doing something in the moment, it's not always the best time to teach them why that's not the right way to do it, or what other ways, or to have a discussion, because they're so into it, they're blended with whatever's happening. It's not a teaching moment. But when they're calm we could reflect back. Like, remember yesterday when, I was asking you to not fill up your glass so high and then you knocked it over, and, that, can we just talk about that? It's not as intense. It doesn't feel like shaming, but in the moment, I already feel bad the water spilled. Like Dr. Montessori says, be friendly with error. So when they make a mistake in the moment, it's almost like ignore it if they could handle it themselves. So if they spill, let them clean up. If they can't clean up, say, oh, I noticed there's a spill. Can I help you? But and they're waiting for you to say, you did something wrong. But they already know this. Those spilled water teaches them that I did something. So in those moments, it might be that when we do that with ourselves, like maybe when we're blended with a part, it's not always easy to work with that part because we're fully in it. But later that night, there's always that time when we look back and we say, oh, wow, I really yelled at my kids today. I got really frustrated with my coworker. Man, I wish I wouldn't do that. So in that moment, I can go inside and get to know that part and say, oh, okay, what's happening with you? And tell me about what you want me to know. And then a lot of times it's like, what can I do? What part can I play? So the next time our coworker says that, what part would you allow me to handle so you don't have to step in for me? Right. Same with our kids. Like, is it okay if I, when you're feeling triggered, like when I'm talking to the part now, when you're feeling frustrated because you're, like for me, I know, so I have a part that when my kids don't listen to me, it feels like there's like a deep disrespect. Like it's almost like a slap in my face. And then I have an angry part that comes up. And I think it's because like maybe that part thinks, oh, you don't respect me as a parent. You must not think I'm a good enough parent, or you must not love me enough, or whatever deep, and it keeps, you can go down the ladder from there. But to say to that part, can we just play with when you're feeling that way, when you're feeling disrespect, can you allow me to just handle it and see how it goes? And often I find that if that part can hang back, I can get, because when I'm in self, you're curious, right? So you're a really good observer. So instead of feeling like, oh, you're disrespecting me, you're a bad kid, you don't, you shouldn't have dinner, whatever comes out of your mouth, is, I wonder what's going on with my child right now. Like, have they not eaten enough today? Did they get too much sun exposure playing sports and they're wiped out and they're white, or did something happen at school, or is it just hormones that are racing through their system? Like, I'm just really curious, like, you don't seem to be acting yourself. So what's happening with you? Like, and in that moment, the child's parts that might be used to being shamed or being yelled at are like, whoa, what's happening here? Like, he sees me now. He's willing to come to me and see what's happening with me. And in that moment, that's when you notice your child soften and even be like that young one again. Like when they're teenagers and they're like pushing you away, like all of a sudden they want to like lean next to you, or they want to put their hand on their lap, or, you'll just notice a softness when it's like, I'm coming to you with compassion and understanding. And it might also be that because you're a teenager, you don't want to talk to me right now. And I'm okay with that. Like, I accept you for that, which is a very different than, you're hurting my feelings or you are being disrespectful. And I really love Alfie Kahn's work. He wrote Punished by Rewards and also Unconditional Parenting. And in that book, he said, we often, when we ask parents, when their kids are not around, like, what do you want from your kids when it comes to, life? And, I want them to like be creative and like be innovative and not just be a sheep following the herd, right? We want them to like stand out and do something new and like, but oftentimes when our children are not listening to us and misbehaving, we get upset and we withdraw or we yell. And then when they're good, using like quotes, air quotes here, when they're being good, that's when they get the love and the compassion. Oh, you're such a wonderful child. You're listening to me. So what we're teaching them is when you listen and you follow, you get love and affection. When you disobey and you do your own way, you get disconnection, and you get anger. So it's really basically what I'm teaching you is you have to be a rule follower and follow my direction in order to deserve love. And so it teaches those parts, and those are the same parts that what happens on the playground when somebody offers them drugs, like, or wants them to go steal or go do something, and they think, oh, if I don't, I'm not going to have friends, I'm not going to be loved. So to show our children that kind of unconditional self-love when they're misbehaving, quote quote, or not listening, really is basically like saying, even though you might be making bad choices right now, I still love you a lot. Like, I'm still right here. Like, what's happening for you? I see that you're struggling, as opposed to I'm just gonna put up my hands to you right now and walk away. And
Yeah.
So really, maybe think about what happens with parts in those moments. Like, on one hand, it's like I'm creating exiles by saying I don't accept you for being who you are right now.
Right.
The flip side is you're feeling a support even when you're struggling. Like, it's almost like with us, like when we're at our worst, we want our partner or friends, family to hold us. And what happens oftentimes when we're at our worst, they might walk away. And then you feel even worse. You feel even more isolated. And so our children really, really need that same for their parts and for their being. They just need to know that they can't really destroy love and connection. And sometimes it looks like they do. Because when I work with clients, when you go back to those young exiles, it's always like, it's something really, really minor. Like I said this, my dad just looked at me and walked away. And that my part is still standing there, like in this, like, feeling this deep pain of like disconnection and like unworthiness. And I disappointed him so much in that moment. And he doesn't remember that, But if we think of this ongoing activities, for me, it's almost like, oh, wow, like I have this limited time with my children to, not to be so cautious and careful that, I might have a part that takes over and wants to be so cautious and careful. That's not it. But just to kind of remind myself that my actions do matter.
Is there anything else about parenting that feels like would be really a good takeaway for us as we're thinking about our own parts? Like, I'm thinking, I've got two things happening in my head as we're talking. One is my own parts and noticing what happens inside of me when I'm parenting. And then also being aware of my son's parts and having a way of talking about him with his parts. And then also what you just said was so brilliant, because I was thinking, right, because when we've been having this issue with him dropping, he's going to be mad at me for saying this, dropping toothpaste on his shirts. So, like, and I do it too, like you're brushing your teeth and like you drop toothpaste and like, we're running out the door. I know, right? I'm embarrassing him. And then I get so frustrated. And so, right. So he already is feeling, he's got a part that's feeling something about himself. And then he's got me. And, the worst thing I think I could do for him is disconnect from him. Like, that's like probably the worst thing I could do is emotionally disconnect from him.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful. So I've got sort of those two tracks in my head of like noticing my own parts and my own body, and then noticing, just kind of staying connected to him, and then noticing his parts.
As we're aware of my parts and we're aware of our children's parts, if we're feeling warm and compassionate as we're aware, that really gives you a sign you're in your best self, like you're grounded. And if you're feeling any judgment, or you're feeling even just kind of oddly neutral with no feeling, that's probably another part, or distant. So just checking in with yourself to see, how am I feeling towards my children's parts? If I'm not feeling warm, can I even add some warmth? Can I bring in some more understanding? Even if a self-like part comes in, or parenting part comes in, that's better than part that might have judgment or something. But know that the more self we can bring, which also, and so adding and self is one way, or asking parts to step back is like Dick Short's original method of constraint release approach, where as we ask parts to step back, self is just simply there. But when self is there, there's a natural wisdom. So when people tell me, I don't know what to do, what should I do in this situation? Oftentimes, if we could just get into self, we just know. So with parenting, there's no one way to do it. But when we're in self, we know how to do it in a way that's compassionate and patient and courageous and clear and even hold boundaries in a loving way. So as we get into self, you simply just know, like when you're in a good space, you just know how to parent. And then when you're struggling to be in self, if you want to check ourselves as parents, you can ask, am I creating shame right now or connection? Or maybe shame is too strong. Okay, I'm not shaming, but am I creating connection? So you might think, oh, but I'm just teaching. I want to teach. Well, in the moment, sometimes teaching feels like you're doing it wrong, which is shame. So I think one easy way to go is just to ask yourself, am I building connection here? Am I accepting my child, even if they're not doing things exactly the way I would do it? And to know that the more we are open to our children, the more we realize they might have different ways of being that's different than ourselves, right? Like one thing that's helping me as I'm talking to my IFS practitioner is that realizing that even though I love really soft, dim light, easy things, my son really likes bright light and he really likes to be loud. He likes to bark with the dogs. To know that different people have different ways of communicating and connect. And even though if it's different than our way, it doesn't mean they're not connecting and they're not wanting to connect. When we're in self, we could see that. Can I just be open to my child? And if I want my child to be one of these innovators who develop some new technology or cure a disease, if we want them to be like everybody else and just like me, they're only going to do what I could do. So we want them to develop their uniqueness in their own ways of seeing the world. And if we can get curious about how they see the world, they're going to be our teacher as well. Like my children often show me things that I thought I knew exactly how this works and that works. And then they show me a new insight. I'm like, wow, like that's brilliant. But I would have never seen that if I thought it's my job to teach. I'm the parent. Because I age and I become this age, I think I'm more knowing than you because you come from my genetics. Therefore, I have power to tell you how to think. All these parts that think, so just to be open and curious, you really could do that.
Something really practical you just said. I think sometimes it takes too long or hard for me to unblend, or like what part is up and I need to unblend. Like, I don't know that I can sometimes do that in the middle of get your shoes on, but can I add in warmth? Can I add in connection? Can I add in compassion? Totally. And I think that is very helpful and very practical. Like I can add those things in as I'm.
And what's going to happen is by adding them in, you actually do unblend. Right. So instead of just saying, can I stop being angry? Can I stop being angry? It is better to say, can I bring in warmth? Can I bring in connection? Can I just look at my child through that heart lens that we did at the beginning? Can I drop into almost like this lens that rests in my heart that can see my child just with pure love and acceptance? If I can drop in that for a second, I could see that, we're all, as I was at a service one time and the rabbi said that we're all essentially like fragile, like a pottery bowl, like a cracked pottery bowl that we all need to be held gently. And if we could see all of us as something that that needs to be held in such a fragile way, that we really can just be patient and take that care to to just be patient and to bring into that warmth and compassion in that moment.
I love that. We all need to be held gently. So I need to hold my parts that are up around parenting, the way parenting is supposed to look, or how my kid is supposed to respond to me, or the parts that have some perfectionism or, whatever around parenting. I need to hold those parts gently, and then I need to hold my child's parts gently.
Yeah, I mean, if we could do that for just an afternoon, you'll notice,
Ah,
like you'll say, that was the best afternoon I've had with my kid in such a long time. Like we just had so much fun and connection. And so and I guess finally to end, even though there's so much we could talk about, I would just say that in our routines is where we can build connection, where oftentimes in our routines is where we get stress and anxiety and pressure. So like we're trying to get through this activity to get to the next thing. Like we have to brush our teeth, we have to put our shoes on, we have to do, and we might think that's not important. We just need to get through that to get to the next thing. But when you add up all those routines, it's like, this is my daily life. So how
right.
much of my daily life is feeling warmth and connection? So in those routines, if we could tell our parts, this is important too. This moment is just as important as getting to this party, this birthday party, or getting to this school function. That in this routine is life, and this is us being together. So we could think of our routines as like the opportunity, practice, compassion, and presence.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.